Namely, if a ceremonial event is a co-production of broadcasters and establishments, disruptive events are co-productions of broadcasters and the disruptors, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's a hurricane. There's somebody who's trying to destroy the society, and as we know, the media are very interested in this kind of tension. The media and terrorism of whatever kind of nature or social terrorism is like each other in a certain way. It is some kind of love-hate relationship. And so we can see a parallel in the idea of co-production between ceremonial events and disruptive events, except that the co-producers are different. The coalition is a little bit more on the side of the media, and with the disrupting, with the invading force, and against the establishment. So that's interesting, that the media get to New Orleans and say, we're here, where are you? These people are drowned. And so there's a coalition between the media and the hurricane, if you don't mind the poetry, and it becomes against the government, the way that Al-Qaeda joined with the media to make a great drama, and it was a great drama, of the destruction of the symbol of American capitalism against the establishment that let this happen, and so on. So, anyway, so that's one thing that there is, there are other things that are in common. For example, if you look at a disaster, you will find that some of these disasters represent failed conquests. If you send a satellite to the moon and it explodes, it's a failed conquest. If it succeeded, it would be a conquest by our definition. If it fails, it would be a disaster. But on the other hand, if there's an enemy that has caused this disaster, let's say, it's a conquest for the other side. Al-Qaeda was not sad when the two trade center buildings were destroyed, and so on. So I'm now leaving you with a new thought, namely whether disruptive events deserve the kind of attention or have parallels to the ceremonial events which led us to become interested in this genre, and in the sense that they engage the whole world, maybe constructively, in rethinking what it is that our society is about, the way in which Israelis and Egyptians thought about what the Middle East might look like during the moment when Sadat arrived. Similarly, or the moon, what does the moon do for our image of the world, or what does the Pope do for our image of the reintegration of Europe? The new question is, what do we begin to talk about when we consider the disruptive events that also, or no less, cause us to reconsider what it is about our society that needs to be fixed, and how we really ought to join together to do something, and whether there's a paradox of disruption and integration that we ought to be thinking about. Anyway, I leave you in the middle of this sentence. Thank you.
Now, to speak in terms of classical sociology, there is, after the moment of enchantment, it's a moment of disenchantment. So, questions, doubts, comments, we are all welcoming everything you want to say, you want to ask. And for this, you have to push the red button.
In this new book, where you consider the influence of the new media, for example, the death of Michael Jackson was a disruptive event, but it propelled so fastly due to social networks like Twitter. And I think sometimes social networks and internet might work faster than any television that might have cameras on spots, because of personal opinions, of personal statements from people who actually were there and could interpret it in a much wider sense than a camera.
Yes. Yeah, I think the whole new world, I think the whole new world of new media promise the distribution of news and enthusiasm and participation, mobilization, if you like, around somewhat more sectarian or somewhat more particularistic events that travel through certain networks and not others. I don't know whether they compete with the grandeur of television, although television is also transmitted now on the internet. So that there is, but I agree that certain kinds of events, Michael Jackson might be, Diana is just as a better example maybe. The women of the world really mobilized to Diana's life and her rebellion, her outspokenness, and so it was part of a long British, if you like, soap opera of events, beginning with the application of Edward, was it, and continuing through the coronation of Elizabeth, the royal wedding of Charles and Diana. I should say another thing, which I left out, I realized. But anyway, yes, the answer is yes. I left out the following thought, that there might be a decline in ceremonial events, both in terms of frequency and in terms of credibility, of enthrallment. Media events, as defined as ceremonial events, have aroused lately more cynicism than they had before. So that Middle East summits, since Sadat, for example, have led people to say, oh yes, another peace summit, and they aren't. So people become cynical, even about the royal wedding. That's what reminded me. There's cynicism because look at what happened. It was a fake wedding, and we were trapped into thinking that it was a great ceremonial event. So there is a decline in the centrality of media events, maybe in frequency, it's hard to say, but there is a new cynicism that has begun to enter the situation. Plus, and now I go back to the question, the fact that the audience is much more dispersed. It's much more into segments and sects and networks than when a media event could bring them all together. And that's probably the big difference between these kinds of more sectarian events, as said, Diana and women, who are much